time once again for Community Forum, and we are very lucky to have with us live in the studios this morning Cindy Sheehan. Cindy Sheehan is an anti-war activist whose son Casey was killed during his service in the Iraq War on April 4th, 2004 at the age of 24. In response to this tragedy, she founded the Gold Star Families for Peace in January 2005, an organization which is comprised of family members who have had relatives die as a result of war and is dedicated to ending the occupation in Iraq and bringing the troops home. In August 2005, she traveled to Crawford, Texas, with the goal of speaking personally to President Bush to demand an end to the occupation of Iraq. Other peace activists joined her efforts, and the demonstrations became known as Camp Casey. She has traveled to numerous countries to speak to world leaders about diplomatic resolution to conflicts in the Middle East and Afghanistan, including leaders and legislators from South Korea, Canada, Venezuela, Cuba, the United Kingdom, Spain, Italy, France, Ireland, Egypt, Turkey, Iraq, and Jordan. She has been dubbed the Rosa Parks of the anti-war movement and Peace Mom by the mainstream press and has received dozens of peace awards and was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. She is also an accomplished author, having written numerous newspaper columns and magazine articles, as well as 3 books, Not One More Mother's Child, Dear President Bush, and Peace Mom. And finally, she is running as an independent for the House of Representatives in Nancy Pelosi's district in California. Let's start out with your run for Congress and tell us what is the motivation in that?
Well, the motivation is, first of all, I think that Nancy Pelosi has not done a really good job being Speaker of the House. That was my motivation, but I've been in San Francisco now since last September. I moved there at the end of last year. We opened our office in October. And just to see that she really has not been representing the people of San Francisco. She represents her fat cat donors and the fat cat Democrats, but the people have felt unrepresented for years there. But she has taken impeachment off the table. I believe that you can't take part of the Constitution off the table. There's enumerated powers in our government, and one of the enumerated powers of the Congress is to be a check and balance on the executive branch. And she says she's against the war, and she wants the troops to come home, but she keeps on giving George Bush blank checks to wage the war. And since Casey died, I was at first very enraged at the president and the Republicans, but since I've been doing my activism and working with, both parties in Congress, sometimes working against them, I've come to realize that the two-party system is inherently one of the problems in our country also.
Would it be fair to say that your son's death was really the catalyst in you becoming an activist?
Well, I wasn't one before Casey died, and I, was a mother of 4, and I was working 2 jobs at the time he died just to make ends meet for our family, to make sure we had insurance coverage. And my life revolved around my family and trying to keep my family safe. And after Casey died, I realized that I failed at my job, that I should have been looking more outwards and working to protect all the children of the world, not just my own children. And so, yes, Casey's death was a catalyst. I'm hoping, people always ask me, if your son hadn't died, would you have started to be active in the movement? And, I can't answer that for sure, but I hope that I would have, started to attend the protests, speak out against the war, and be more active that way.
Is that part of the message you're trying to deliver about when you were talking about being a mom for other children in the world? Is that something you're encouraging other moms to do as well?
Well, I think that we're part of a human family, and one of the things that keeps us in these wars is the ability of the American public to allow our leaders to demonize other people, dehumanize other people. And and especially since I've traveled around the world and met people of all different, just a diverse a diverse amount of human beings is that we're all the same, and we all have the same heart. We all want the same thing for our children and our families, so some security, some prosperity, and that all the children of the world belong to us, and we should fight for all the children, not just our own.
Again, stepping back a little bit, do you think when you were at Camp Casey, had President Bush actually taken the time to come out and talk with you, that things would be completely different now?
Well, I always said that whenever he met with me, I would leave. And if he had met with me the first day, I think that, it would have been a story regardless. The press would have covered it, but it wouldn't have become the movement and the event that it became, where 15,000 people came actually physically to Crawford, Texas. We got messages of support from all over the world. I got 30,000 pieces of snail mail delivered to Crawford to me that summer, and the postmaster was definitely happy to see us leave. But yeah, if George Bush had met with me, then I'm certain that I still would have continued with my activities, trying to make a dent in the consciousness of this country. But him not meeting with me really accelerated that process.
Yeah, I know of actually people here that had, while you were there, had said, this woman, Cindy Sheehan, is doing this, and they drove, from Washington to be with you. And many people attribute the significant surge in the anti-war campaign to your efforts there.
Right. We just met a lady last night who was there. She came to dinner with us. Her husband, Paul Richmond, is running against Norm Dix for Congress. Correct. And so she was out at Camp Casey. I think that many people were frustrated with the president, frustrated with the occupations, but didn't know where to focus their frustration. And Camp Casey gave them a place to receive inspiration from, whether they came there or not. There were hundreds, if not thousands, of vigils all over the country in support of me. Camp Casey's sprang up all over the country. There was one, I know, in Denver, Colorado. There was one in Chico, California. There was one in Union Square in New York City. So people who couldn't come to Crawford made their own. So I think that is when the numbers significantly turned against George Bush in the war, where his popularity rating started to go down, and the approval of the war started to go down. And now it's in George Bush's approval ratings are the lowest of any president since they started keeping such ratings. And of course, 2/3 to 3/4 of the country disapprove of the war and want our troops to start coming home, if not immediately, within a reasonable, quick time period.
So you became one of the leaders in the anti-war movement, the current anti-war movement, and and obviously that took a heavy toll on you. And it was in May of last year that you kind of said that enough is enough, and I've got to focus again on my family.
Well, it was almost exactly a year ago. It was May 30th. It was on Memorial Day, and I had just gotten back from a trip to Europe where I was in Amsterdam and Ireland working with the anti-war movements there. And I went to Crawford because we were going to do some activities there out at Camp Casey, my property. I bought 5 acres in the summer of '06 because the Board of Supervisors in McClellan County had just put some very stringent, actually that were declared unconstitutional laws against free speech along Prairie Chapel Road. So I had to buy my own property so we could have the protests. And I was exhausted. I was ill. I was in a lot of pain from a disorder that I was experiencing. I was practically penniless, and I was starting to be attacked from people who had previously been my friends. And that was just, I could take Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity and, all those clowns attacking me forever. But, when people who were previously on my side started to attack me, that was just too much for me. And I thought, what am I doing? Why literally am I killing myself? And so I did. I quit. I went home to my children and sold my property. I was going to go into humanitarian work with my organization, Camp Casey Peace Institute. And in fact, we had already had a trip to Jordan planned to work with Iraqi refugees. And within the 5 weeks of my very short retirement, I was able to replenish my bank account and get my health back to order. Running for office is wonderful because I'm in one place most of the time and I'm very close to my other 3 children. So I get to see them a lot more than I did. So I just, and when I retired, I got so many messages of support, but people were saying, you can't. There's no way you can retire. You'll be back. You'll be back. You'll be back. And they were right. Within 5 weeks, I was back.
And what was the spark that brought you back?
Well, it was when George Bush commuted Scooter Libby's sentence. And we have found out in the recent Senate report that, and I knew this all along, and I suspected it, was that, Scooter Libby was convicted of obstruction of justice and perjury in the Valerie Plame case of Valerie Plame was a covert agent, CIA agent, who was outed by the administration because her husband, Ambassador Joe Wilson, dared to question George Bush's claim or the administration's claim that Saddam was seeking yellow cake uranium. And so they outed Valerie Plame to punish an enemy. That was one thing that Richard Nixon was being impeached for. And so George Bush commutes his sentence. And to me, that was an act of treason because presidents do have that power to commute sentences or to even pardon people. And we know that Bill Clinton made numerous controversial pardons when he left his office. But George Bush was, his office, if not George Bush, was a complicit in the crime that he commuted Scooter Libby's sentence for. So that really made me mad. And not one person in Congress questioned that, said it was wrong, or said maybe it was time to impeach. And so as a humanitarian effort, I thought that it would be a really positive event for humanity if George Bush and Dick Cheney were impeached. So we started a journey for humanity from Crawford, Texas, where I had sold my property, to Washington, D.C. to get there and demand impeachment. And then I had an idea, if Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats, the Speaker of the House, would not put impeachment back on the table, then I would challenge her for her seat. And really, John Conyers, congressman from Michigan, who's the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, gave me the idea because in one of our meetings, he said, well, you can give me petitions, people can call my office all day, you can march, you can do whatever, but unless my job's threatened, I'm not going to move on this. And so I certainly didn't want to move to Detroit and challenge John Conyers. So I thought, well, I'll challenge the person who is the major impediment to impeachment, and that's Nancy Pelosi.
And why not, I believe you were previously a registered Democrat. Mm-hmm. Why not do so as a Democrat as opposed to an independent, which you are running as?
Well, one of the reasons that a lot of people were on the left, so-called left, were smearing me last year was because I publicly left the Democratic Party. Right before I left the Democratic Party, the Democrats again gave George Bush another blank check for war, and they wouldn't even entertain Congressman Woolsey and Congresswoman Woolsey and Congresswoman Lee's proposal to put a timeline on the funding bill. They wouldn't even entertain it. They can whip their caucus into supporting non-binding resolutions, which by their very name are fruitless and a waste of time. George Bush doesn't even pay attention to binding resolutions. But the only thing that Nancy Pelosi can do to end this war is to stop funding it. And she's the Speaker of the House, and she's the one who has the power over what gets put on the floor to go for votes. And she can tell George Bush to really, she likes to blame the Republicans. She likes to blame the Blue Dog Democrats. She even incredibly likes to blame the people of Iraq for what's going wrong in Iraq. But if she would just say, George Bush, you have plenty of money to bring our troops home. We're not giving you another dime for this occupation. That would be the effective end of the war. And if George Bush refused to do that, and if he started perhaps, raiding some other funds illegally to pay for the war, then she could truly blame him. But you can't say that you're against something and fund it. She very always duplicitly puts the funding bills on the floor and then votes against them. So I left the Democratic Party, and because, like I said earlier, one of the problems, the complete stranglehold of our democracy, I think, is due to the two-party system. And it's not really two parties when both parties get their pockets lined by the same people, when both parties really do the will of the lobbyists and their corporate donors and don't listen to the people. And in this country, the two-party system that we have, I think, is a detriment to democracy. And we need to work really hard, people of conscience, people of compassion, people of commitment. We need to work together to build a movement that truly represents the people and not the corporations.
Assuming you win the election, what concrete changes would you then be proposing?
Well, we don't have enough time to really go through everything, but we need to, I think, overhaul our electoral system in this country. We need publicly financed campaigns. We need to get the lobbyist money, the corporate money out of campaigns. I think that's like the number one issue that keeps our country in constant wars, because so many of our corporations profit off of war. The corporate media are owned by entities that profit off of war. Congress is invested in companies that profit off of war, and they get money from companies that profit off of war. So to me, it's a clear conflict of interest. You can't represent the people and represent the war machine at the same time, because the war machine is definitely harmful to our country. It's harmful to our economy. I think that we need to bring our troops home for sure, and that would save $16 billion a month. But our Pentagon budget is over $1 trillion for the first time in history. We need to cut that back. We have 45 to 50 million people in this country without health care. We need a universal single-payer health care system. We need to repeal such constraints on education like No Child Left Behind. We need to fully fund education and make it free and accessible to everybody in this country, not just the established property money class. We need to, if not nationalize oil companies, tax their excess profits so we can get a truly clean, green sources of energy happening in this country, and eliminate our need for fossil fuels. We need the list goes on and on and on. I could talk all day about the changes we need, and these changes directly affect my district. We have great public transportation in San Francisco, but it's expensive. It costs more to take BART into the city than it does to drive into the city. We need to make public transportation, if not free, cheap and accessible for everybody. And we need to make our public transportation system greener than it is, and that's for sure. It's just amazing to me. Oil is going to go up within weeks, if not days, to $150 a barrel. It's already up to $138 a barrel. Some analysts are saying by summer it'll be $200 a barrel. And there's some people who are having to choose between buying gas or food. They're having to miss work because they can't afford the gas that it takes to get to work. People are losing their homes because of this military economy that we have, this economy that's based on exporting death and destruction. And even though Ronald Reagan takes credit for the collapse of the Soviet Union, it really was their military expenditures keeping up with America and, ironically enough, their decade-long war in Afghanistan that really caused the collapse of the Soviet Union. And if we don't voluntarily give up our empire now and bring our troops home and reduce what we spend on defense. China has 1 billion more people than America. China spends $95 billion a year on defense, and we spend $1 trillion. We spend more than all the top countries put together on defense, and that's something that we have to confront as much as we confront the two-party system.
Yeah, it seems in a lot of ways that the current economy is opening a lot of people's eyes. The war economy with, let's say, the price of oil is really forcing people, I think, to reevaluate their own priorities as well as the rest of this country's.
Well, absolutely. And, it's ironic that before the occupation or the invasion, the initial invasion, people like Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld were saying that it was going to be, 6 months top, $50 billion tops, and the proceeds from the Iraqi oil fields would pay for the reconstruction and everything. And this has been and George Bush even told, I believe it was Pat Robertson, the Christian, right-wing Christian minister, that we wouldn't even lose one American in this invasion and occupation. And, it turned out that, of course, all of their predictions were wrong, and it's been a disaster. And, defense analysts, I'm sure that they knew that their predictions were faulty and that they were lying and they were selling the American public a bill of goods. And it has, if we, the people of America, sit back, we're going to let the Bush administration, with the help of Congress, collapse the, United States of America. And we saw the Roman Empire that we're taking the same trajectory, but the Roman Empire lasted over 1,000 years. And our empire is going to last less than 300 years if we don't reject the idea of having over 1,000 bases around the world and these occupations that are just sucking the life out of our economies and our families. And the neocons have very deliberately kept this war away from the average American. That's why it's so hard to get a movement going. We don't have a draft. George Bush reduced taxes. People are getting this wonderful gift of $300 from the government to help stimulate the economy. We don't see the coffins coming home. George Bush has not attended one funeral of a soldier. We don't hear about the fact that 6 or 7 Iraq veterans per day commit suicide. The 300,000 who have come back with devastating brain injuries. We don't hear about these things, and so the war personally affects a very small portion of our population. But what is affecting everybody, like you said, is this economy that is the worst, certainly, since I've been alive and aware of things. So, now everybody is being affected, and I'm hoping that spurs people to action. And, we need the kind of action where we voluntarily give up driving our cars or drive our cars the least amount as possible. We need to have a massive general strike in this country. That doesn't last just 3 hours or one day, but lasts for days. We need to put ourselves in between, our children in the military industrial complex. And the only thing that the people that are running our country care about is money. And we can do so much as citizens to put a monkey wrench into the system. We can designate a day. Let's say it's the day before or the day after Independence Day, where we take our money out of the banks. We all go down to the banks and have a bank holiday and say, we're not investing, we're not putting our money in the system. I mean, it wouldn't do very good to me to go out and take my, $10 out of the bank. But if everybody did that, that would really be significant. If everybody even refused to pay a portion of their federal income taxes, that would be very significant. I think it was Henry Kissinger in Vietnam who said, let them march as long as they pay their taxes.
So you are in the process, I think, of collecting signatures down in your district.
Right.
So I assume you have a website where people can connect up?
Yes, you can go to my website at cindyforcongress.org, cindyforcongress.org. It's a real grassroots people's campaign. I, of course, will represent the 8th District, but I think the values of San Francisco are real human values of compassion and health and prosperity and security for everybody. And that if we can start this revolution in San Francisco, that it can spread across the United States. I keep looking at your map where all your pins are and, just thinking of the wealth of resources we have in this country, of human resources, that if we could really join together, and there's only 535 people in Congress, and you add the executive branch, that adds, a few more people, and we have 300 million voices that should be screaming in unison for accountability, for peace, for prosperity, to really return good, decent, healthy manufacturing jobs to the United States. Let's onshore our jobs that have been offshored for so long, so people can have relative prosperity and peace. But California makes it super difficult for independents to get our voices heard. There's only been one other independent in the state that has qualified to be on the ballot. We need to get 10,198 signatures. And with 430,000 registered voters in the 8th District, that doesn't sound, like it's a very difficult thing to do, but it is very difficult, especially in a city that is one of the major tourist cities in the whole world, not just the United States. We run across the fact that not even 50% of the people we talk to are registered to vote there. So it is a difficult task. We need resources. Of course, people, your listeners can't vote for me, but they can certainly contribute $5, $10, $20, $25 to our campaign or whatever. We have incredibly raised almost $170,000 off of an average donation of $68.
Well, with that, we are unfortunately out of time. I want to thank you very much for coming in and spending time with us.
Thank you, Mike. It was great.